It was a cold, lonely Saturday night in Austin, Texas, and the eerie stillness of the neighborhood wrapped around my little one-bedroom house like a suffocating blanket. I was in my early 20s, living alone for the first time, a bittersweet experience that balanced freedom with an undercurrent of quiet dread. That night, I chose solitude over the bustling city, binge-watching Netflix and munching on stale leftover pizza. The house was shrouded in darkness except for the pale blue glow of the TV, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Around 9:30 p.m., the first knock shattered the quiet. My heart skipped a beat, a primal instinct awakening in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't expecting anyone. No sound of a car pulling up, no crunch of gravel to announce an arrival. My driveway was right outside the living room window, visible even in the dim light, yet there had been no sign of life. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the stillness. Reluctantly, I paused my show, the silence in its absence almost deafening, and crept toward the door. My hands felt clammy as I peered through the peephole. A woman stood on my porch, her dark hair tied back in a tight ponytail, her hoodie and jeans unassuming. She seemed ordinary, but something about her presence set my nerves on edge. She noticed me watching and flashed an overcompensating smile. "Hi," she called, her voice muffled but clear. "Sorry to bother you, but I'm your neighbor. My phone died, and I need to call someone. It's kind of an emergency." Her words didn't match my reality. I'd lived in this house for a year, long enough to know my neighbors by sight, and this woman was a stranger. My instincts screamed at me to shut the door and pretend I wasn't home, but her urgency tugged at my conscience. Hesitant, I cracked the door open, leaving the chain fastened. "I don't think I've seen you before. Which house do you live in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I just moved in 2 houses down," she replied quickly, her smile faltering under the strain of its own artificiality. "Please, it'll only take a minute. I need to call my husband." Doubt gnawed at me, but I didn't want to seem rude. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. She stepped inside with unsettling speed, her movements deliberate, almost predatory. The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing down on me as she stood just inside the threshold. "You can use my phone," I said, pointing to the coffee table where it lay. She didn't move right away, just stood there, her hands buried deep in the pocket of her hoodie. Her eyes darted around the room, not with curiosity, but calculation. A chill crept down my spine. Finally, she walked toward the table, her steps slow and deliberate. My instincts screamed louder now, the sense of danger palpable. She stopped in front of the coffee table, but instead of picking up the phone, she turned to face me. The friendly facade melted away, replaced by a cold, merciless stare. From the pocket of her hoodie, she drew a large folding knife, the blade gleaming even in the dim light. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice calm and icy. My breath caught in my throat. "Take it easy," I stammered, raising my hands defensively. "If you need money, I can give you money." She didn't reply, only gestured toward the couch with the knife. "Sit down." I obeyed, my pulse hammering in my ears. She stood there watching me like a hawk sizing up its prey. Then she glanced over her shoulder and cracked the front door open, making a subtle hand gesture. Heavy footsteps thundered up the porch. My blood turned to ice. The realization hit me. She wasn't alone. Adrenaline surged through me, and I sprang from the couch, bolting toward the back of the house. "Get him!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the air like the blade she held. The sound of pursuit followed me, footsteps pounding against the floor as I tore through the kitchen. I reached the back door, fumbled with the lock, and flung it open. The cold night air bit into me as I sprinted barefoot into the backyard. Gravel and dirt cut into my feet, but I didn't care. The fence loomed ahead, and I scrambled over it, ignoring the splinters digging into my hands. Behind me, shouts and footsteps grew fainter, but I didn't stop running until I reached a house with lights on. I pounded on the door, screaming for help until an elderly couple answered. Their warmth and concern were a lifeline. The husband called the police while his wife tried to calm my shaking form. When the officers arrived, they searched my house but found no one. They told me there had been a string of home invasion robberies in the area, the perpetrators working in groups to overwhelm their victims. The officers' words sent a chill deeper than any winter wind. You're lucky you got away. These people don't leave witnesses. I moved out a month later, but the memory haunts me. I double-check every lock, never answer the door for strangers, and sleep with a baseball bat by my bed. The scariest part isn't the knife or the pursuit. It's the moment I ignored my instincts and let her in. One wrong decision, 1 second too slow, and I wouldn't be here to tell this story. 6 months ago, I moved into a modest single-story house in Texas. It was a place meant for fresh starts, a cozy escape from years of cramped apartments and noisy neighbors. At 27, I was finally living alone, embracing the freedom and solitude I had longed for. The neighborhood seemed ideal, quiet and serene, with polite smiles and nods from families and elderly couples. It felt like a safe haven, a place where I could finally breathe. But peace is a fragile illusion. In the beginning, it was the silence that unnerved me. Every creak of the wooden floors and groan of the walls at night seemed amplified in the emptiness. I told myself it was just the house settling, a natural quirk of old structures. Still, I couldn't shake the prickling sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes followed my every move. Then came that Friday morning. I was in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee swirling around me, when a knock shattered the quiet. It wasn't the casual rap of a neighbor or the brisk tap of a delivery man. It was deliberate, heavy, and insistent. My pulse quickened as I approached the door, peeking cautiously through the peephole. A man stood on my porch. He was mid-40s, unkempt, with a scruffy beard, a filthy baseball cap, and a toolbox clutched in one hand. The clipboard in his other hand seemed oddly out of place. Something about him felt wrong. I cracked the door just enough to speak, the chain lock securely in place. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice tight. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, ma'am. I'm here to check the pipes under your sink. The previous owner sent me, said there might be an issue with the plumbing." The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. My stomach turned. There had been no mention of repairs from my landlord. Something about this felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong place. "I think you have the wrong house," I said firmly, trying to shut the door. Before I could, his hand shot out, gripping the edge of the door with surprising strength. "Look, ma'am," he growled, the false politeness evaporating. "I'm just here to do my job. Let me in, and I'll be done in 10 minutes. My heart pounded in my chest as fear surged through me. "I'm calling my landlord to check," I stammered, hoping it would make him leave. His grip tightened, his eyes, cold and predatory, locked onto mine. "You don't need to do that," he hissed, his voice now dripping with malice. Summoning every ounce of strength, I slammed the door shut and locked it. He pounded on the door, his shouts muffled but furious. My trembling hands dialed 911 as I backed away from the door, my breath shallow and panicked. When the police finally arrived, the man was gone. They found little, just a cigarette butt and muddy footprints leading away from the house. I wanted to believe it was over, but it wasn't. 2 nights later, as the clock struck 1 a.m., I lay in bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The faint glow of the street lamp outside seeped through the slightly open blinds. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. At first I dismissed it as swaying branches, but then it happened again, deliberate and unnerving. Someone was outside my window. The realization froze me. Slowly I turned my head, dreading what I might see. It was him. The man from my porch stood just feet from my window, his face partially illuminated by the street lamp. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. A sickening wave of terror washed over me. My fingers fumbled for my phone as I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I whispered, "He's here. The man from before. He's outside my window." The operator's voice tried to soothe me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. His gaze felt like icy hands gripping my throat. Then, as the distant wail of sirens approached, he finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. The police searched the area, but once again he was gone. They found more cigarette butts and footprints, this time by the fence in my backyard. He had been watching me. Days later, the police informed me they had caught him. He had broken into another woman's house a few streets over. She had managed to escape and call for help. "You're lucky you called when you did," the officer told me gravely. "He's been targeting women living alone. He's wanted for multiple assaults across the state." Lucky. The word felt hollow. I moved out of that house within a month, but the fear lingered. Every creak, every shadow, every sound in the night feels like a harbinger of doom. I double-check every lock, every window. A knife rests on my nightstand, but it offers little comfort. Living alone was supposed to be freeing, but now it feels like a prison of paranoia. And the worst part, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone is still watching. It started like any other quiet night in my modest two-bedroom house in Austin, Texas. I'd been living alone for a few months since my roommate moved out. And while the solitude was something I'd grown accustomed to, there were moments when the silence felt suffocating. My job as a software engineer kept me busy, often working late into the night, the glow of my computer screen my only companion. That Thursday night was no different, or so I thought. The city hummed faintly outside, and the shadows from the streetlights danced across my living room walls as I half-watched a documentary on Netflix. My laptop hummed softly on the coffee table, my mind teetering between relaxation and the ever-present undercurrent of unease that living alone brings. And then came the knock. It was loud, sharp enough to slice through the quiet like a blade. My heart jumped, the kind of startled jolt that leaves your skin prickling. I glanced at the clock on my laptop, 12:07 a.m. Nobody ever knocked at my door at this hour. My pulse quickened as I stared at the door, half hoping it had been a mistake, a sound carried from some distant neighbor's house. But then it came again, louder, more insistent. I stood, every instinct screaming at me to stay where I was, to pretend I wasn't home. But curiosity is a strange thing. It pulls at you even when you know you should resist. Slowly, I moved toward the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the peephole, I saw him, a man standing on my porch. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, his scruffy face shadowed by the hood of a worn sweatshirt. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, and his posture was oddly slouched, as though he were trying to seem non-threatening. Yet everything about him felt wrong. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, and there was a kind of emptiness in his eyes that made my stomach churn. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Who is it?" He looked up then, his lips curling into a weak, almost mechanical smile. "Hey," he said, his voice muffled by the door. "Sorry to bother you, but my car broke down a couple of blocks away. I just need to use your phone to call for help." The words seemed rehearsed, each syllable clipped and deliberate, like lines from a poorly acted play. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. "There's a gas station down the street," I replied, my voice firmer now. "They should have a phone you can use." The man didn't move. For a moment, the air between us felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. Then he leaned closer to the door, his breath fogging the peephole. "Please," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I've been walking for miles. I just need to make one quick call. It won't take long." The desperation in his tone was unnerving, but it only fueled my suspicion. Why hadn't he gone to the gas station? Why come here, to my house, in the middle of the night? "I'm sorry," I said, my words quick and final. "I can't help you." For a moment there was silence, and then so low I almost missed it. I heard him mutter, "Come on, just let me in." A cold shiver raced down my spine. Before I could react, the doorknob rattled. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped back, watching in frozen horror as the handle jiggled again, this time more violently. "Stop!" I shouted, but my voice felt small, swallowed by the suffocating quiet of the house. My heart thundered as I stumbled toward the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. My phone was still on the coffee table, and I cursed myself for leaving it there. The sound of the man's shoulder slamming against the door echoed through the house, each impact sending shockwaves through my trembling body. I forced myself to move, to think. Grabbing the phone, I dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator. "There's someone trying to break into my house," I hissed, my voice shaking. "Please send someone, hurry." The operator's voice was calm, steady, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around me. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way." I could still hear the man outside, his breathing heavy, almost animalistic. He slammed into the door again, and I swore I heard the wood begin to splinter. My grip tightened on the knife, my knuckles white as I backed into the corner of the living room, my eyes darting between the door and the windows. Then, cutting through the night like a beacon of hope, came the gruff voice of my neighbor. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" It was Mr. Clark, the retired Army vet who lived across the street. I didn't dare move, but through the window I could see him standing on his porch, his shotgun in hand. The man at my door hesitated, his heavy breathing slowing, and then, like a shadow melting into the night, he ran. The sirens arrived moments later, their wails piercing the stillness. The police searched the area and found him hiding in a neighbor's backyard, a knife in his pocket, and a darkness in his eyes that still haunts me. One of the officers told me I was lucky. This man had been prowling the neighborhood for days, looking for someone like me, a woman living alone. I've since upgraded my locks, installed cameras, and bought a security system that alerts me to the smallest sound. But even now, months later, I still feel his presence in the quiet moments when the house is too still and the shadows grow too long. Every knock at the door sends my heart racing. Every creak of the floorboards feels like a warning. That night changed me. The world doesn't feel safe anymore, and no matter how many precautions I take, I know I'll never truly escape the fear. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet and uneventful, or so I thought. I had just finished dinner, the room dimly lit by the glow of the TV. Outside, darkness had swallowed the world, made thicker by the woods behind my house. The eerie silence was broken only by the low hum of the television. It felt ordinary, yet something in the air felt subtly off. Around 8 p.m., everything went dark. The house plunged into an unnatural silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. A power outage wasn't unheard of in my area, but it was rare enough to catch me off guard. I sighed, reaching for my phone to use the flashlight. As I stood, something caught my attention, a fleeting movement in the corner of my eye. I turned towards the window and froze. A beam of light was slicing through the pitch black of my backyard. My breath hitched as I realized someone was out there. The beam moved slowly, deliberately, as though searching for something or someone. My backyard is fenced, secluded. No one should have been there. My heart raced as I crouched low, trying to stay hidden. I crept towards the window, peeking out cautiously through the corner of the curtain. The sight sent a chill down my spine. A man, clad in a dark hoodie, was standing just feet from my back door. He held a flashlight in one hand, and in the other, something glinted ominously. When he stepped closer, the light caught it. A crowbar. He wasn't lost. He wasn't wandering. He was here for a reason. I ducked down, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my phone. My mind raced, a mix of fear and survival instincts. Dialing 911 felt like an eternity, each ring a dreadful countdown. When the operator answered, I whispered frantically, explaining that someone was in my backyard, armed. Her calm voice was the only thing anchoring me. She told me to hide, to stay quiet, and assured me that help was on the way. The bathroom. It was the only room without windows, with a lock. I crept down the hallway, every step feeling thunderous in the suffocating silence. I kept my flashlight pointed at the floor, terrified of drawing attention. My breath hitched with each creak of the floorboards, my legs trembling as though the fear had seeped into my very bones. Reaching the bathroom, I slipped inside, locking the door behind me. I turned off the flashlight and sank into the bathtub, phone clutched in a death grip. The operator's voice murmured in my ear, keeping me tethered to some semblance of sanity. Then came the sound that shattered everything, the sharp, crystalline crash of breaking glass. He was inside. My blood turned to ice as the sound of deliberate, heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Each step was measured, unhurried, as though he knew he had all the time in the world. The operator whispered for me to stay calm, but calm felt like an alien concept. I could hear him moving room to room, opening doors, drawers, searching. His movements were methodical, almost taunting. He was coming closer. The sound of a doorknob turning sent my heart into a frenzied rhythm. I held my breath, shrinking into the corner of the tub, trying to become invisible. My fingers ached from clutching the phone so tightly. Every second stretched into an agonizing eternity. And then, voices outside, shouts, the police. Relief flooded me, but only for a moment. There was a loud crash, a door slamming, and then frantic footsteps. The man was running. The chaos that followed was a blur of noise, more shouting, a struggle. Then, silence. A knock on the bathroom door made me jump, but it was an officer's voice. "It's safe now," he said gently. With shaking legs, I emerged from my hiding place, each step towards the living room feeling surreal, like walking through a nightmare that refused to end. The man lay on the floor, handcuffed, his face pressed against the carpet. He looked ordinary. His hoodie was askew, revealing a face that could have belonged to anyone. A neighbor, a co-worker, a stranger you pass on the street. That ordinariness made him all the more terrifying. The officers explained that he was a known burglar, targeting homes in the area. They told me I had done the right thing by hiding and calling for help. If I had confronted him or tried to escape, the outcome could have been far worse. Even now, the house doesn't feel like home anymore. I've installed locks, cameras, motion lights, every precaution imaginable, but none of it erases the memory of that night. Every shadow feels like it's watching. Every noise feels like a threat. The once familiar creaks and groans of the house are now sinister whispers in the dark. This is the reality I live in now. My sanctuary turned into a cage of paranoia. And every time the power flickers or I hear a knock at the door, I wonder, will it happen again? Or worse, next time, will I be ready?